Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this very unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers, all while enjoying award-winning wine. So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's captured a serial killer. Yes, this is real true crime and real wine. 40 years in law enforcement and in winemaking. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, take you on a journey profiling some of the world's most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world. Now, I've got my favorite Casaro wine today, a Trebbiano, drinking a white wine today, but we're going to talk about that a little later on. So pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. On this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Tony Costa. Now, Tony Costa was a serial killer who had a huge counterculture following in the 1960s, and he was found guilty of 2 murders, but prosecutors say, and law enforcement believes, likely responsible for many, many others. Now, I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. Hi, Brandy.
Hi, John. Great to be here.
Yeah, and Brandy, this is a really strange case because in a unpublished manuscript that the killer wrote afterwards, he said, "Oh, and by the way, it wasn't me, it was my alter ego that was responsible for murders and dismemberment of these women." Now, how do you catch an alter ego?
On the right day. I was thinking about this, and I think anybody can say and claim alter ego, and it goes back to accountability, right? You see a lot of serial killers wanting to take claim for some of this stuff, but then it's almost like an out-of-body experience, blaming it on someone else.
Yeah, and you got to remember this, 1960s counterculture, and he was heavy into the drugs. No telling what he saw when he was high and doing what he was doing. So let's get right into the case.
All right, John. So today we are talking about Anton Charles Tony Costa, formerly goes by Tony Costa, born August 2nd, 1944 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, died May 12th of 1974 in Walpole, Massachusetts. So like you mentioned when we started the show, American serial killer convicted of 2 murders, but suspected in 4 to 8, plus just others between 1966 and 1969. Johnny had a nickname, Cape Cod Vampire or Cannibal, because it's rumored that he would remove the hearts and then he would bite them. He targeted young women, often dismembering and mutilating their bodies. So we've got a guy who not only is a killer, but now he is eating his victims.
Yeah, and, the thing about that was the rumors were debunked. Right? He did dismember his victims. And we're going to get into this a little later, but that's another one of those, we pick unique cases. We pick cases that are fascinating. And this is one where the prosecutor tried making this a much bigger deal than it was because he wanted to run for higher political office. And by calling this guy the Cape Cod Vampire and talking about heart removal and organs being eaten, he did bring attention to himself and to the case. But you got to remember, this is Cape Cod community, 1960s. Very hippie-like with a cult countercultural following. So this was a big media event.
So because of the hippie area, Cape Cod community at this time, this is drawing attention. I mean, it's drawing attention from authors like Kurt Vonnegut and Norman Mailer, and it highlights undetected predators in that counterculture scene. And like you said, the drugs, the prosecutor running for office. I mean, there's a lot of things going on with this case. And maybe it wasn't as big as like you said, giving him a cannibal name, saying he's eating body parts. So a lot of interesting pieces of this case, I would say.
Well, and Vonnegut was huge at this time,
That's right.
right? You're talking about one of the most influential authors, writers of the generation, and he corresponded with the killer and many times came out and said, "Oh, I really don't think he did it. I think he's a fine guy, a normal guy." So whether he was trying to sell his stories, sell his books, whatever, but you can see how it was almost, for this serial killer, a perfect storm of media personalities, Hollywood personalities, and politicians that really put this guy on the map. So that is very unique, very interesting.
So I can't wait to jump into that later, and tell our listeners more about how what this guy and the influence that this had at the time. But let's talk about his early life. We want to talk about where they come from and what kind of, the nature versus nurture. And so his father dies when he's an infant. His father died in World War II. He had a mother, Cecily, but she remarried. And then he reported seeing ghostly visions of his father at around age 7, entering his room at night. He grew up in Massachusetts, but he'd started to exhibit really early antisocial behavior. So now we have visions at a very young age, not being social with other peers at his age. So we're starting to see some of these red flags.
Yeah, and there's always, some of those precipitating stressors that we look at, the red flags, the boxes that we check. And by the way, Brandy, I had a listener DM me this week and said, "Hey, I've got the True Crime Profiler's Notebook."
Great.
And I love when you and Brandy do the setup in the beginning, because I'm sitting there checking the boxes with you, right? I'm going, oh my gosh, I can see what happened to this guy and how they evolved. His dad's death, which he really didn't understand, he was an infant, but his mother remarried, and I think it was kind of shocking to him, kind of disturbing. One of those things as a child that really kind of shakes your world, and I think we see that. Then we hear about these visions that he's seeing. He's 7 years old. So we're not talking the visions that he reported later on in life that were probably very LSD induced. So there might have been some of those mental health issues from, that dramatic childhood very early on. But certainly we know that he was also antisocial as he grew up. So all of this is kind of starting to come into play as he moves into his teens.
Yeah, I did. The first thing I did think John was 7 years old, seeing visions. And then I think maybe he had pictures of his father because he died when he was an infant. Did he even really know what his father looked like? So maybe the mother had pictures and that's how he's able to see his dad. So I find that very interesting, that he could identify that really at such a young age.
Right.
So he does get into his adolescence, and just like checking the other boxes, we start to see some crimes happening early on. At 16, November 1961, he actually broke into a Somerville apartment and sort of stood over a sleeping teenage girl.
Exactly. Can you? How terrifying
Oh my God,
is
that is like my word. I'm not even joking. Every time I watch a documentary or something and you have someone break in, just their power to get in and hover over a sleeping person is absolutely frightening.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think that's terrifying. So, we don't know a lot about many of his younger crimes, but this starts off with a bang. At 16, breaking and entering into somebody's home and then bending over the sleeping girl. And what's scarier, Brandy, he didn't stop there. He returned just a couple days later with the intent of dragging her away.
Oh my God. Okay. Was he able to do it? Did somebody see him?
He was actually stopped. The neighbors saw him this time. So, we don't know if the girl was alerted that, wow, somebody I think came in my window, or I think somebody was in my room last night. Maybe other folks were hyper vigilant, but he was stopped by neighbors, thankfully. He was arrested, however, and convicted of burglary and assault, but he's a young offender. He's 16, first offense. And that's all he gets is a 1-year suspended sentence. and 3 years
Wow.
probation. So I don't know. I know you got to give these kids a break, and I'm
Yeah.
all for you mess up one time. But to me, this kind of case, a break-in, a burglary, a sexual case standing over the girl,
Mhm.
is almost like, it's not like I got drunk and I was stupid. I
Yeah.
drove my car into a tree. I stole something from the 7-Eleven. You know what I mean? This is
Yep.
a different kind of crime. And he gets a 1-year suspended sentence. I mean, a
Mm.
slap on the hand.
Well, and he not only that, he did it once, but then returns
Yep.
days later to then take another action to get her out of the apartment. And I agree with you. I mean, we say this, I think, on every episode, when it happens at this age, and like you said, first offense, but 1 year suspended sentence. I mean, dragging her out of the apartment, it does seem a little light to me.
Yeah. 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 Totally. And again, how many times have we seen this? These guys get out, they get a slap on the hand,
Yep.
it emboldens them. And this is what we end up with years later, right?
Well, just a couple years later, I think he's trying to maybe fit into society a bit. He actually gets married in April of 1963. He's 18 years old at the time. They have 3 children, so he becomes a father very, very young. But the marriage started to deteriorate because he started using drugs, methamphetamines, barbiturates, LSD. Again, we're in that counterculture area,
Yep.
but it starts to lead to some bizarre behavior.
Yeah, and it does. And his relationship with his mother becomes worse. When she remarried, it seems like he didn't like it, went downhill, loved his mother, but hated his mother for it. That kind of torn, mom, do you want me? Do you want a husband? Do you care about me anymore? So now he's in a bad marriage. He's into heavy drug use, bizarre behavior. He's got this horrible relationship with his mother. And he just says, forget it. 1968, I'm going to California, right? How many
Right.
people did that? I'm off. I'm going to
So
Berkeley.
many.
I'm going to San Francisco. And
Yep.
and he goes to Haight Ashbury. I mean, he goes to the epicenter of it in 1966. And then returns back to Massachusetts in 68. So he might have found drugs,
Hmm.
might have found some other stuff, but not what he was thinking about. And apparently he had stolen and hidden thousands of dollars of medical equipment. So it could have been financial that he went back to Massachusetts too.
So I do think what you mentioned about the love-hate relationship with the mother and being exasperated by the father's death and the remarriage. I think that's very interesting how he feels that way at this age, knowing that the father has been dead since he was an infant. And then the
Right.
remarriage. So you would think in those 18, 19, 20 years that he would have been able to heal from that, or he would have been able to but I do find it interesting that he brings this stuff up such later in life, John, which goes back to the fact of we really don't even know how young of an age can be affected by significant trauma events just like this.
Or mental health issues, right?
Yes. Or
He
just
could have been
something not addressed. Yes.
Right. He could have been experiencing these mental health issues since 7, 8.
I know.
Certainly could have been exhibiting them at 16, breaking into the apartment. A lot of times, the marriage wasn't good. That can lead to drugs or drinking. But when you talk about the amount of drugs he got into, was that self-medication? We've
Most of
seen
the
that
time.
over and over, right?
Yep.
We've
Yep.
seen they know something's wrong. I'm not sure what it is, and they try to self-medicate. So you have a whole lot of things going on here, and some early red flags. We know he was antisocial. We didn't talk about it, and it's not a big deal in itself, taxidermy, but how many times, my Lord, does that come up in our cases, just like my serial killer case?
Mhm.
We do know that he had abused animals at some point and talked about it. We know this love-hate relationship with his mother, the crimes, the breaking and entering, the drug use, the unstable relationship. So, we're going down and checking all the boxes.
Yeah.
This guy is going quickly. 16, 18 years old, young 20s, going quickly down that road that we see these offenders go down as they evolve into the killers they eventually become.
Well, we've got those early red flags, like you mentioned, and like everyone listening, get the profiling book so you can follow along with this. But John, profiling is your background. What do we know so far about this guy? What are we picking up besides some of those early red flags?
Well, I mean, we've checked most of the boxes. We know the substance abuse is there. We don't see abuse by the family member, but you have this love-hate relationship that he talks about, with his mom and with the remarriage and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I would certainly be checking the box on mental health issues, diagnosed or undiagnosed. I would also check the box on self-treatment, self-medication. It could be simply drug use. But to me, since some of these things started at 7 years old, he started manifesting these visions. He doesn't just think or fantasize about women. He breaks into their apartment and stands over them. He returns and wants to drag them away. Even his early marriage at 18, it's like he's grasping for straws, right?
Yep.
And having kids way too early, 18 years old, and you're having 3 kids right away. And the animal abuse, certainly that we talked about. So we're checking all these boxes here. We are building this profile of a serial killer in the making with Tony Costa.
So we start to see more criminal activity. He actually shoots a female acquaintance with an arrow in the woods in 1967, but called it an accident. He burst. I don't know. Go ahead.
No, this is, there's so many, when we literally have hundreds of cases that we look at. And even with hundreds of cases, it's not like thousands or tens of thousands. But I can recall just on the cases that I've worked or I've been familiar with or I've assisted on, in my little world, at least 3 different cases where serial killers early on shot somebody with an arrow.
Okay, so what do you think of that?
I don't know. I've never asked him about that, but that certainly has to be on my serial killer questioning list coming up. Is
it the hunter? I mean, is that what it is? Like the power of being able to take someone down, the pain? Yeah.
Well, yeah, but see, an arrow, that is so strange. One, that a person would have a bow and arrow, right? Most people don't. Right. If you're a hunter, you probably have more of a compound bow, especially today, which is a professional hunting bow, which is really similar to shooting someone, right? They're very sophisticated technology. But we're talking a bow and arrow. And like I said, I'm personally aware of at least 3 different instances where these serial killers shot somebody with an arrow. And to me, that's more about pain. That's more about torture than killing him, right? And we're not talking about shooting him in the heart. Almost every one of these, and shooting an arrow is difficult. I've done that for a while, and even as a hunter, and it's very difficult. So maybe that's why they're wounding him. They're just not a good shot yet, or not a good enough practice. But anyway, you said that, and something popped in my brain, and I went, "What is this?" But I may need to ask one of these guys. Why? Why an arrow and why as a youngster? So sorry to interrupt, but
no, because I think there is some significance to that. I think it's almost like usually when you're shooting an animal, the animal doesn't see you. You're able to shoot it and take the animal down. You have an eye on it, but it doesn't really have an eye on you. And so I do think there is something to conquering a power. And like you said, pain. seeing them, I mean, that hurts, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to kill them necessarily, depending on where you hit them. But I mean, this is this is 60s and 70s. And so this is probably not a sophisticated bow and arrow. It is probably just a regular bow and arrow. So a lot of pain infliction, I would say, and being able to know, like, you're able to conquer something that doesn't know you're about to conquer it. Very interesting.
These arrows are terribly sharp. I mean, I remember
Right.
after getting a new bow, I would go to my ranch and hunt and just kind of misfired one time. And the arrow is a razor, right? So it slipped my pants and I've still got a scar on my leg. You can imagine actually getting shot and impaled with one. But yeah. Anyway, so we see that. I just thought that was, we have these odd things that we're tying all these cases together with, and that's just another one to kind of put on our radar map when we see it.
Well, and then in 1968, just a year after the bow and arrow incident, he burglarizes a doctor's office, steals $5,000 in drugs and tools. So now we see going in, stealing things. He's actually arrested in September of 68 for license suspension, and then arrested again in November of that same year for child support failure. So he's starting to get on the court's radar, John.
Yep. Yeah. And we see these petty crimes starting to build. And again, we're not worried so much about the child support, the, license suspension, but certainly the burglary, the grand theft, the shooting at somebody with an arrow, all starting to build. So the crimes that he started when he was 16, continued 18, continued until he's 20, and now kind of settling in this Provincetown, Massachusetts area. So he was in Massachusetts, went to Haight-Ashbury, after the bad marriage and the drugs. Drugs continued, nefarious activity out there in San Francisco. But then I'm going back to Massachusetts. That's my hometown. And that's what we see in 1968, him going from from Haight-Ashbury to Provincetown. But something really unique, at about the same time, a female that he knew vanished when he left California. They thought he had something to do with it, eventually found her later, but it won't be the first time that somebody he knows kind of vanishes, right?
Well, and he actually moved that summer of 68, which is the same time he is burglarized, arrested for the license and the child support. So now he's getting out of town, going back to where I would think is more maybe his comfort zone in the Massachusetts area. He worked as a handyman and carpenter, so just, probably, odd jobs here and there. He grew marijuana, so probably, I don't know if it was just for himself recreationally or his intention was to sell it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. Yeah, no, we know that. So it was a rather large area where he grew marijuana, Brandy. And that's going to come back into play because police have him on their radar. Right. And that's going to come back into to haunt him later on. But it is, not open knowledge, but an open secret about his growing the marijuana in the woods. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, in September of 68, gosh, a lot's happening in 68 with this guy. He's
that's that whole move back from California back to Massachusetts. He gets back there. Well, now authorities can arrest him because he's been gone 2 years. His license is suspended. He hadn't paid child support, so he's arrested for that. He starts committing burglary. So, yeah, this is all kind of manifesting itself when he returns to Massachusetts.
So in 1968, his girlfriend, he's got a girlfriend now, Susan Perry, she disappears, John.
Yep.
He then becomes an informant for the police in an effort to gain access to information. This kind of reminds me of people butting themselves into the investigation. The guy became a reporter. He was reporting his own crimes. So he becomes an informant to basically gain access to information.
Exactly. And we see this as a very common characteristic with serial killers. When we're profile them, they show back up at the crime scenes. They show back up at the grave sites. They introduce themselves into the investigation, all the way up to, like you said, the serial killer that we had that reported on his own crimes. I thought that was amazing.
I
But
know.
we've had killer after killer that, goes up to the police, approaches them. What's going on? What are you doing here? I'm just a good citizen. Can I help? Oh, we've had serial killers that have searched for the bodies of people they've killed. So they do try to inject themselves in the investigation. They want to know what the cops know. And of course, the cops aren't going to give out all the information, but they kind of do it as a ploy. It's a power and control thing. And he is now known to the police, a known informant, and injecting himself into these cases.
And I also find it interesting. Sometimes we see them lead search parties.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting too, right? They know where the body is, but nobody else does. So yeah.
Well, isn't that it's a game,
It
right?
is.
It's a thrill. They're not going to lead you to the body.
That's right.
They may even lead you astray, but they want to be out there. They want the thrill. They know you guys are searching in the totally wrong place. I put her by the river, by the oak tree, by, that type thing.
Yeah.
So absolutely amazing how they do interject themselves into these cases.
John, we have another victim in 68, Sydney Monzon. By the way, we already said that most of the people he's targeting are young women. This is a white female, 18 years old. Now, Sydney vanishes from Provincetown, her house, dismembered and buried in the woods. So what do we know about Sydney?
Well, one of the things that we know is, again, we've got these series of women kind of vanishing around this guy, right? They're with him, they're seen with him, and then all of a sudden they disappear. But with her, it's a little bit different because she was killed, she was dismembered, and Turo Woods, where the body was buried, is very close to where Tony was growing his marijuana. So we're going to see Turo Woods come up over and over again. We do geographic profiling, Brandy, and, where is their comfort zone? Obviously, what we've seen his comfort zone is back here in Massachusetts. Now we know his comfort zone is where he's growing the marijuana and Turo Woods. So this is where he can dispose of his victims. He can be with his victims. He can dismember his victims. So from a geographic profiling standpoint, it's very clear now that he has some specific comfort zones. And while we're on that, let me just kind of, continue. His victim type is this white female young. That is his victim type. Not so much blonde hair, blue-eyed, brunette, anything like that, but he's going for some of the most vulnerable victims in society are young females, and we've talked about that a lot, and that certainly is his victim type. He married young. His, wife was young. So we see this pattern of these young white females emerging in his life and vanishing sometimes also. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro winery brands. And it's fitting to share with you what I'm enjoying today, a glass of our Bianco. It's a dry white wine made from 100% Trebbiano Texas-grown grapes right here on the high plains of Texas. This Casaro white wine has got a floral expression. It's light and invigorating taste. And of course, there's absolutely no better wine to enjoy while you're listening to your favorite podcast than our Trebbiano. So go to CasaroWines.com and order your True Crime and Wine today, or today's brand, our Trebbiano. Salute.
Okay, John, so we have talked about victimology profiling a bit, geographic profiling, some of where his comfort zones seem to be. But let's talk about more his personality.
Yeah, he certainly had that serial killer personality. He was charming, we were told. He was debonair. People said he was intelligent and he was cunning, but he was also overconfident. And I think you see that in him injecting himself in the cases and the cat and mouse game he kind of played with the police. I'm growing marijuana. You kind of know I'm growing marijuana, but you're going to leave me alone because I'm an informant and I can help you with things and I'll give you some information, but I'm not going to give you everything. So we certainly see this narcissistic, no empathy, charming, delightful, debonair sociopath, right? That's what
Yep.
we've got. Sociopath coming out here. And the thing that kind of tips him in different ways, I think, is his drug use.
Yeah.
Because a lot of serial killers are not heavy drug users. They're very clear-headed. They know what they're doing. They know how they're doing it. They may be self-medicating to some degree, but we see with Costa some pretty heavy drug use. You know, we saw it before he went to California, certainly saw it in Haight-Ashbury, and now that he's back in Massachusetts, it's not just a weed that he's growing and using, it's LSD, it's barbiturates, and we know that he's sharing them with his victims, and what happens when you share Dilaudid and barbiturates? You're drugging those victims, right? You're making them helpless so you can do what you want. So I think it's very interesting here when we talk about the duality of personalities, but I see this all the time with these sociopaths. One side of it is this charming, debonair, narcissistic killer. The other side is a pure predator. The guy that shoots you with arrows, the guy that breaks into your house, the guy that kills you and dismembers you and buries you by his marijuana field. So you've got the two sides, and that's where these psychotic sociopath labels come in, because you may see one side of it and don't know anything about the other, but this guy was definitely debonair and a predator at the same time.
And then he blames it on his alter ego, which we'll talk about here shortly. But what's his MO, John? Let's profile the MO here.
Well, we know he's giving him drugs, right? Because he's sharing the barbiturates with him. He's luring him out to the woods or isolated spots out there by Turo, right, where he's growing the marijuana, shooting him in the head or neck with a pistol at .22 caliber, and then he dismembers them. So we've got post-mortem mutilation here. Now, we're going to talk about this in a minute. The prosecutor goes way overboard on this because he was trying to sensationalize this for his own personal political benefit. But we do know that Costa dismembers them, he stabs them, he peels their skin away in certain instances, and we see bite and teeth marks on the body. So there is a lot of dismemberment that is going on afterwards. And that's why it gets me back to that whole arrow thing. I know I'm hung up on it. I keep hitting my mic. I'm so excited. The pain, the torture, he's getting a joy out of something other than killing him. But now it seems to have kind of moved to, well, they're dead. Let me see what I can do with them now. And I'm going to mutilate them. Then, Brandy, we also see necrophilia. So not only is he dismembering these bodies, peeling their skin away, biting them, he's having sex with them.
Oh, and my first thought is, John, if you're burying something in the woods, why do you need to dismember it? Like, I go back to, like, is that just that has to be some sort of satisfaction in himself to be able to inflict the pain even after death. Because if the point is just to bury, you can bury a person whole. You don't need to cut them up in pieces just to go bury them. So to me, that is just such a fascination for him to inflict pain. And like you said, the necrophilia even after death.
Well, and not dissimilar than the toy box killer we did, right? Where he disemboweled some of his victims, put their guts into a gunny sack, and then filled them with rocks and threw them to the bottom of the lake. So we see this behavior, and he is dismembering his victims, then having sex with them,
Mm.
and then bury them in a shallow grave, which he's not really concerned about them being found. They could be dug up by animals. They could be found by law enforcement. His primary focus, I think you can say at this point, is post-mortem.
Yeah.
It's post-mortem because let's kind of walk through this case. He's got his victim. He drugs her up. She's kind of listless, kind of lifeless. Maybe they have sex, maybe they don't have sex, but there's not a whole lot there, right? They're really in a drug state. Then he kills him, and he kills him quickly, shoots him in the head, but then spends time biting him and peeling their skin away and dismembering them and having sex with them. So obviously, this is the focus. They all have it, right? They all have it at some point. What gets them off, what gives them the high, and this is what's given him his high.
Okay, well, we talked about the suspected victim, Sydney, in June of 68, but let's talk about the first known victim and murder of Susan Perry, white female, September 10th, again in 68. This was actually a live-in girlfriend.
Yeah, that's his girlfriend we talked about. Remember we said she'd vanished? Well, this is really where it comes up, September of 68. So he probably has at least one murder under his belt by then. Right,
at least, yes.
Because we know that they're going to find that body in Truro. Now we're really thinking this is his first kind of confirmed one where all the pieces kind of come together. September 10th of 68. It is his living girlfriend. He cuts her into 8 pieces. He buries her in Truro again, right? Or buries her in Truro, the same area close to where he's, growing the marijuana. And when people ask, hey, what happened to your girlfriend? Oh, she took off and went to Mexico.
Yep.
Yeah. So I haven't seen her. She's gone. Maybe she'll come back, but she's in Mexico. She's not in Mexico. You cut her up and buried her near your marijuana fields so you could visit her again.
Second victim, John Christine Gallant, white female, November 23rd. This is a very active year for him. Again, 1968, drowned in a bathtub after a barbiturate overdose. And we know that she had shared drugs with Costa.
Right. And so this, came out later. She was an acquaintance of Costa. She was a drug user of Costa. Not his typical MO. Drowning the victim in a bathtub. It could have been one of those deals, a little bit too much drugs, right? Barbiturate overdose, and drowns on her own, but certainly another victim that we're adding to the pile here. Remember, he was only eventually convicted of 2 murders. Police had pretty good evidence on 4 and some fairly substantial knowledge of 8. So this guy certainly is building a track record here. Victimology, pretty standard, right? Pretty standard, straight down, young white females. That's his thing. We don't know anything specific: hair, eye color, height, weight, as far as that's what turned him on. But certainly just the young girls that he wanted to be with, that he wanted to do drugs with, have sex with, and eventually cut up, dismember, and have sex with after they're dead. So we're talking about people that he befriended, that he provided drugs to. So we're not talking about picking up a prostitute on the street, taking her out and killing her. So a little bit different MO. These were probably just young girls, naive girls. Hey, would you like to go do some, drugs? Would you like to go back to my apartment? That type thing. And not just people from the street, prostitutes, homeless people, hitchhikers, that type thing. His crime scenes, the bathtub, I really think that was probably an overdose. Is probably something that went terribly wrong. But we're going to see that there is some significant physical evidence. There is a geographic comfort zone. There is a victimology. There is a fairly organized crime scene. He takes his weapon to the crime scene. He brings the weapon back home. He does bury the bodies in a shallow grave. He is trying to get away with it. He is interjecting himself in the investigation. So we're seeing some of these very, very organized behaviors. And, the dismemberment and necrophilia all kind of play into that, don't they?
Well, and it's consistency with all the victims, right? I think that's where the organization comes in. Is he, like you said, he's bringing the weapon, he's taking the weapon back with him. He is just luring them with drugs, most of the time. But it is that post-mortem that I think excites him.
Yeah.
And I think that is the end game for him. There's a third murder in 69. Patricia Walsh, white female, 23 years old, from Providence, Rhode Island. She is shot in the neck. She is cut in 2 pieces, skin peeled, again, necrophilia, and buried by his marijuana woods.
Yeah, and see, that's that's why the bathtub drowning. I really think, okay, bad night, right? They did a lot of drugs together. She did too much. She drowned. Now he's just got to get rid of her, that type thing. But this is pretty consistent now. We had 2 murders in 68, 2 to 3 months apart. Now all of a sudden, less than 2 months later, so that cycle is getting closer and closer, together. He's got that need even more. He's killing him on a quicker pace now. Same MO, shooting him in the neck, cutting him up, peeling their skin. And everything that I got from the case notes is a lot of this peeling he did with his teeth. That's where the bite marks came from, Brandy. Yeah. So he is finding enjoyment in kind of peeling their skin with his teeth and then having sex with them post-mortem.
I don't know, John, psychological stuff there. I mean, that's like, it's like eating an apple. Like, that's what it kind of just reminded me of. Like, you bite the skin and just kind of peel it back with your teeth, and to use your mouth. It's just very bizarre. All right, Mary
Yeah,
Ann.
our producer about fell back in her seat on that one. But yeah, I just thought I'd share with you a little bit. No, and again, that's why, we bring in these cases. We're trying to figure out, right? And that's why we have these true crime lovers around the country, around the world, and they're listening to the podcast and they're sitting there and they're like, I just can't believe one person would do this to another person, right? Because we are good, normal, sane, or at least you are, Brandy, people, and we don't think like that.
Yes.
It never crosses our mind. Right? We do not think like that. And how would this guy possibly get enjoyment by dismembering his victims, peeling back their skin with his teeth, biting them, and having sex with them after that? Absolutely amazing.
Well, and I remember, John, when we met, I think it's been 6-7 years since we met, and I interviewed you. And I remember you telling me, like, I would ask you so many questions, and you're like, don't try to figure them out, Brandy. You don't want to go there.
Into their brain. No.
Yes, don't do that. And so, but it is just mind boggling. I mean, okay. And then it reminds me of an Ed Gein thing here, right? So did he do anything with this skin, John? Did he just do it for enjoyment?
Yeah, I don't think, Ed Gein was a totally different level.
Right.
He made things, right?
Yeah,
he made
right.
lampshades and chairs. He made bed covers out of skin. I mean, some of the things were just totally off the wall. And again, God, those pictures of his house they always pop back in my head constantly because, again, the guy was harvesting organs and skin and body parts. And no, this guy was doing it for sexual pleasure. He was doing it as a sexual predator and committing these acts. absolutely mind-boggling when you think of this. But no, Brandy, you don't ever want to get into their headspace.
I try not to, John. All right. Well, we've got
But
our
I did like that. I got to tell you, I did like that analogy of peeling the skin off the apple.
I mean, that's
That
kind of
was
what it
good.
reminds me of, right? You can control it a little bit. Some people like to really bite into the apple, and some people just like to peel it with their teeth along the way. Okay, that's about as much of the mind as I'm getting today.
Yeah, I can see some of our listeners right now that may be enjoying a glass of wine, some grapes, and an apple, and they go, "Oh, we'll think we'll put that down."
And touching their arm and their skin. It's still there. I promise. I promise. All right. So we've got Mary Ann Wasaki, white female, 23 years old, January 24th, 1969, murdered with Walsh, shot in the head twice, cut into 5 pieces. There are stab wounds, and again buried near his weed farm, John. So what do we know about Mary Ann?
Yeah, so this was a double murder, right? Because Walsh and Wasaki, both white female 23, were together. So he lured them into the woods together and murdered them. So this is the first time we see kind of a double murder occurring. You know, we had the homicides occur in 68, and now we're in January 69. Remember I told you that killing timetable was getting closer. Well, it's doubled up.
Yeah.
It's doubled up on this. He's double dating, double murdering, and stabbing, peeling the skin, having sex with them, and burying them in Turo. So he's escalating so quickly, almost. I would say you're de-escalating at this point, right? You're de-escalating at this point, and not escalating. So, you know, just to recap, because that was a lot of victims in a short time span there.
Yeah.
And if you go all the way back to 66 with the suspected ones, you know, you probably have 4 confirmed. We certainly know the July, November, January. We are pretty sure about the 4 suspected and the disappearances. We know he's motivated by this sexual sadism. This is not normal murder. This is not normal sex. You know, this is peeling away skin. This is dismemberment. This is necrophilia. And we know that he's not going after your typical easy, low-hanging fruit prostitute hitchhiker. He's actually targeting women in the hippie scene at bars and places he meets. He's offering them drugs. We know he's got money from the property that he stole, the equipment he stole. We know he's growing marijuana. We know he's selling the drugs. We know he's providing drugs to these young women, especially barbiturates, LSD, sometimes Dilaudid. So this whole hippie scene, right? And you can see why Vonnegut and Mailer picked up on this. So he goes to Haight-Ashbury, which is the epicenter of hippies in America. Then he comes back and he's in the hippie scene in Massachusetts, and his victims are these young countercultural girls. And I think that's what brings these writers and high society people and folks like that into it, because it really is, these murders are now shining a light on kind of this hippie counterculture, drug use, and what can happen.
Well, it kind of goes back to Manson, right? Like, I think of that. I mean, you have the Beach Boys, you have actors, you have drug users who are interacting with people of high influence in that, and at that time, because there a lot of people are using drugs and experimenting with things. But gosh, that was the whole thing around Manson, is the groups and the cults and the drugs, and
what was his connection with the Beach Boys? What was his connection with writers and producers and things things like that. Yeah, exactly. It tied in together, and Hollywood was fascinated by it. The media was fascinated by it. You had all of these magazines, Vanity Fair and New York Times, and all these huge articles that were running about the counterculture and the experience and the drugs. And now we had another serial killer, right? In addition to Manson, who just absolutely blew up huge, another serial killer into the mix. And you can see why this was just a huge story.
Yeah.
This was a huge story in 68, 69, because it was that time period. It was that same time period, and that's what grew out there. But he got greedy. And like I said, we see this evolving until we see the devolving. And that's when we catch him, when we see that devolving. And in February of 69, they started a search party for Walsh and Wasaki.
Okay.
And they said, we have got to find these girls. It can be weird, a one-off. Remember, he said his girlfriend went to Mexico, right? You might have but we have a pair of young women, and they're not just young women; they're 23 years old. So, they're a little older, a little more mature, and they go and authorities say we're going to go actively search for them. Now, you got to remember, they know about the marijuana field.
Okay.
He's been playing both sides of the fence here. I'm an informant. I'm kind of helping. I'm injecting myself into these cases. They actually go and find where Walsh abandoned her Volkswagen, where it was in the woods. And upon finding the Volkswagen, because remember, Walsh and Wasaki were together with Costa. Upon finding the Volkswagen, they discover Susan Perry. Remember Susan Perry from September?
Yeah.
So
the live-in girlfriend, right? The one he
they
said he went
kind
to
of
Mexico?
stumbled on it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
They kind of stumbled on it. So they're out searching for the two young ladies and stumble upon Susan Perry and this horrific scene. Because remember, she had been cut into 8 pieces. Yeah. But he buried her in a shallow grave. Remember how we kind of said he didn't have disregard for that? He got his jollies off of the necrophilia and the all the other horrible stuff. So we really didn't care, and he put her in a shallow grave. Well, that's one of the problems. When authorities start looking, or a family goes out on a picnic, or whatever happens, whether it's the Green River Killer or the Eileen Warhouse down in Florida, where the family found the body, when you bury them in a shallow grave or barely cover them, they're going to be exposed at some point.
That's right.
So they're looking for the two girls. They find Susan Perry. So now they're like, uh-oh, something's going on here. So they keep looking for the girls, thinking we're going to find them, and they find parts of Wasaki.
They find parts of Wasaki.
Parts of her that had been scattered. Remember, he cut her up into like 5 parts or something. Then they find Walsh. Then they find the rest of Wasaki. So investigate. So now they've got parts of Perry and Perry's body. They've got parts of Wasaki, and then they find her whole body. They find Walsh, and they figure all this is connected. They're all in the same geographic region. All of the women have been mutilated with a knife. All of them apparently were shot. And they're like, oh my God, we're on something really big here. Then beneath the girls, they find parts of Sidney Monzon.
Oh my God!
Remember the victim from earlier in 68. So he's actually at this point almost stacking the bodies on each other. Today's show is sponsored by Casaro Winery, a boutique winery that specializes in dry red and white wines, and the only place you can find our award-winning true crime and wine brands made especially for our true crime lovers. So visit CasaroWines.com to purchase your own bottle or bottles of our true crime and wine brands, and then sit back and enjoy the wine as you listen to our podcast or watch your favorite television show. That's CasaroWines.com, and while you're there, join our True Crime and Wine Club. It's just for you. Salute.
Okay, so definitely a comfort zone. I mean, how many times have we seen this? Like bodies popping up in the same geographic area, buried and within, 15, 20 feet of each other. And like you said, underneath, she's found underneath some of the body parts of the two victims. So
Yeah.
we've got the geographic stuff. And so what are they doing about, so you said they knew about the marijuana, right? He was an informant. So what do we know about the marijuana? What do we know about the woods? Are they starting to clear this out and look for more bodies?
Yeah, I mean, so now we're up to 1, 2, 3, 4, right?
Yep.
That we've got here in the Turo Woods, right near his marijuana farm, and the bodies all had signs of necrophilia, so they know they're dealing with somebody sick. Because they knew where Costa was growing the marijuana, and it was so close to where the bodies were found, they said, he's our number one suspect.
Okay.
We think this guy has something to do with it. We know that women around him have disappeared before, right? My girlfriend went to Mexico.
Yep.
Back in, I think it was even 66. No, in early 68, when he moved to California, he was suspected, a girl that he knew what was gone and had vanished. So authorities know, wait a minute, we got 4 bodies now. They're close to where this guy is growing marijuana. We know this guy hangs around these types of women, and we know some of his girlfriends have disappeared. So they start tying it together and discover he knew all 4 of the women. And that fingerprints were found on a torn cover of the Volkswagen's owner's manual, which was in the woods.
Wow.
Now we've got him tied, not just with close proximity to the marijuana where he's growing, but actual knowledge of him, the victims, and physical evidence of him and the victims. So once they launched that search party, it did take a little over a month, to put it together. But when those bodies started showing up, Brandy, and then when they started showing up on top of each other, it wasn't a far stretch to figure out who was behind it.
Well, thankfully he is arrested shortly after that, John, on June 12th of 1969. So what do we know about his
arrest? It still
took
a couple months.
It sure did. What were they trying to do? Were they picking the fingerprint, identifying the fingerprint during that time?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing all the physical evidence, all the forensic evidence. They're trying to get their case together, right? To say, we don't want this guy to slip through the holes. We think we've got a serial killer on our hands. We've got at least 4 victims. What physical evidence do we have? Again, we're talking 1969. We're not talking DNA. Today, how quickly would this case have moved? If we had found 3 bodies, 4 bodies, and had a prime suspect today and could get a warrant and collect DNA evidence, it would have moved really quickly. But we're talking 1969. Things are taking a little bit longer, but still, he's arrested. He's charged with at least 3 of the deaths that they can pin to him. And in 70, about not quite a year later, he is convicted of Wasaki's murder and Welch's murder and sentenced to life in prison. So even though they couldn't convict him on all 4 or didn't or chose not to, they were able to get those 2 convictions. And that's where the numbers kind of vary, right? 2 convictions, 4 that we're really sure of, 4 that we suspect, we think 8 is probably a good number there. But this guy's in prison, and he's in prison for the rest of his life. He's not out there killing women anymore.
Well, like you said earlier, this gained a lot of attention. Basically, Edmund Dennis in the media talked about how Walsh and Misaki, where the hearts of each girl had been removed from the bodies and were not in the graves. Each body was cut into as many parts as there are joints. So this gained attention. You have them coming out and saying that body parts aren't found, and then saying there's cannibalism. So you mentioned this earlier. So what kind of other attention did this case grab?
Well, it's already got this, attention from the counterculture, right? And the writers, the Hollywood kind of types. And now this DA who has his aim on much higher political office. He wants to run for governor. He eventually does run for governor. He's eventually elected governor. So he really blows this out of proportion. He plays to the media. He calls him a vampire. He calls him a cannibal. Yes, we know there was dismemberment. Yes, we know he was peeling the skin back. Yes, we know there were bite marks on the body and stuff. And yes, we know there's necrophilia, but do we technically know he was a cannibal? You might surmise it. Maybe he was. A high percentage of these guys are. But you can see how this district attorney was shine the spotlight on me, shine the spotlight on my case. Again, you mentioned Manson earlier. That's taking place same time, really. You've got the LA DA doing the same thing with that high profile case. So I just thought it was really interesting. If there was not enough grief that these families had to go through for losing their loved ones or daughters, writers are playing it up, Hollywood types are playing up, and the dang DA is playing it up, even though he really didn't need to. This was a horrific crime, right? This was a horrific series of crimes, and he wanted to get as much mileage politically out of it as he could, and that was unfortunate.
So we mentioned Kurt Vonnegut, an author, and so Kurt Vonnegut was actually in correspondence with Costa. Is that right?
Yeah, he actually corresponded, and his daughter, Vonnegut's daughter Edith, actually met Costa. That's where that link first came in. And Vonnegut compared him to Jack the Ripper in a 1969 article of Life magazine. And he included a whole series of essays with that. And Vonnegut, even after the conviction, maintained a correspondence with him and said that the messages of his letters to me was that of a person as intent on being virtuous as he could not possibly have hurt a fly. And I believe it.
Okay. So that was the alter ego blame, and then the blame of who he is actually a good person.
Oh, yeah, the real guy's a good person. It was his alter ego. It was this bad side of him, this devil that took over. I've got to know him through letters. Well, you're lucky he didn't kill and eat your daughter.
Yeah.
Right?
Crazy.
You're lucky you didn't take Edith out and drug her up and take her to a field and kill her and dismember her and pull back her skin and have sex with her. But, this guy is selling magazines. Life magazine's a pretty big magazine. And he is one of the most famous writers of the time. And it just shows how this was just a wild, weird, crazy period in American history, right? And now we've got serial killers thrown into it.
So, he goes to trial, right? We mentioned that he is convicted of these crimes, but they found a few things. So, satanic worship. They found like cult books in his cell. The DA claimed that heart removal, cannibalism. So these are just things that were brought up at the trial. The evidence was the fingerprints on the manual. And then buried the 22 pistol. I didn't know he buried the pistol.
Yeah, near the graves, and they found it eventually. Wow. So now they've got the bodies, they've got the pistol, they've got the fingerprints. So the Again, this is one of those things where the case was never in doubt.
Yeah.
This guy had injected himself in here. The police were familiar with him. The evidence was overwhelming, but it's just simply this story that evolved with the Hollywood types and the writers and the occult and the cannibalism and the story grew much bigger than it was, and then Costa added fuel to the flames, quite frankly.
Okay.
After he was in jail, he wrote a unpublished novel called Resurrection.
Okay.
And in Resurrection, he said that his friend, Brandy, Carl, his friend Carl, was consuming LSD and Dilaudid with him and the two women. And the two women he's talking about is Walsh and Wasaki.
Okay.
And he said Carl was responsible for killing and dismembering the girls and then bury them. So he's adding this fuel to the fire about this alter ego or this other person, or it wasn't him. So was it the totality of the drugs? Was it the sociopathic behavior of this serial killer? Was he trying to get more attention and more fame, because he already had this bandwagon countercultural following here? I don't think there was ever any Carl, any alter ego. It could have been a drug-induced state, or it could have been him simply saying, well, you know what? You can't blame it all on me. Carl did it too.
Well, I find it interesting, John. He wrote this while he was in prison. So the drug use, right? So then the psychological mental illness might still be there, but the drug use is no longer there. So whatever the psychological effects of that previous drug use were, we don't know. But to me, it's like disassociating himself from what happened, right? Blaming it on someone else, not taking accountability, almost like he can live in this like his own alter ego almost, and looking outside and saying, oh, well, Carl's responsible for this.
Yeah. And he even talked about the other two deaths that he wasn't convicted of, Perry and Monson, and said, oh, they were simply overdoses. Yeah. We were out doing drugs together. That doesn't explain shooting him, cutting him up, killing him, and burying him, stacking them in shallow graves.
Yeah.
And he just said, Carl did it.
Well, Costa dies in prison. He hangs himself in his cell on May 12, 1974. Later questioned as a possible murder by counterculture enthusiasts. So what did they say? That maybe he did not commit suicide, that he was then killed by somebody working in the prison? What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think what you're seeing here is he apparently died by suicide, like you said, in 74, but the stories came out. You got to remember how high profile this was. Oh, he didn't kill himself. That he was killed to cover up what was going on in the hippie counterculture in Massachusetts. He was killed to cover up the drugs. He was killed to cover up the sex. He was killed to cover up the stories. And he was going to tell everybody what had been going on in Haight-Ashbury in 66 to 68, what had been going on in Massachusetts in 68 and 69. He was going to reveal not just about the marijuana fields, but about the LSD and the barbiturates and what was going on in the hippie bars and the joints and things like that. So, we've got a lot of conspiracy theorists today, and certainly back in the 60s and 70s, they had it too. This was a big story. It was in the news. When he killed himself, it was, oh my gosh, not that he had psychological problems, which he had, not that he had some type of mental illness that he might have had, not that he was actually a sociopathic serial killer that he was, but that he was going to reveal things in upcoming books and publications that the counterculture didn't want people to know about, and it was made to look like a suicide. But however it went down, Brandy, we have closed a book on Tony Costa, the Cape Cod vampire, the cannibal. That really wasn't. He was a serial killer who got off on killing and dismembering women and then having sex with them. But now he's dead. As we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners, follow us on our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine, or shoot us an email, truecrime@casarowines.com. That's also where you order your wine, casarowines.com, CASSARO wines, plural.com. And you can order wine. Follow along with us as we profile killers in each and every show. So I want to thank today Brandy for helping me, of course. Great co-host. I love you so much. I love doing these shows together, kind of the highlight of my week. So thank you for joining me on this journey. And our producer, Lauren Bedso, back in the Corsicana Command Center. She makes this show possible. She keeps us on track. And I invite all of you to join us for our next episode. Yes, the first of season 4. Our next episode in season 4 is a serial killer who was always looking for love and giggled like a schoolgirl, even as she confessed to poisoning and killing 4 husbands for their money. I'm John Matthews. Thanks for joining us today for True Crime and Wine. Salute.